the assay comes before the loisasa, you do not treat it like a lava nitik lasay, and you get malchus anyway. And the raya was from our Mishnah that says you get malchus for going into the Beis Hamikdash when one is tummy. Now that was a problem because Rabbi Yochanan had claimed that he was chayzer from that, but Rabbah claims that he wasn't chayzer. So there was a discussion when you have an assay before Elois assay, is it considered a lava nitik lasay? Now the wild card was oinus. We know by oinus the assay of loisil isha comes before the lav of loisucha l'shacha kol yomov. So the problem was there. We know for sure the halacha says that you don't get malchus. The Brisa says that you don't get malchus if someone divorces his wife who he was ma'anis. We don't give him malchus. Rather, we tell him he has to remarry her, and he only gets malchus if he was bitlo. So you see from here that you do get malchus. The Gemara said onis would be different. Onis might be different because there it says loisucha l'shalcha kol yomov. So the Torah tells us, even though normally you might consider if the assay is before the loisa said, it's not a lava nitik lasay. By oines, the Torah tells us differently because the Torah says loisucha l'shalcha. What type of shiluach is prohibited? Kol yomov, a shiluach that's going to be kol yomov. So the Gemara said that fits in perfectly with the approach to assay, to a lava nitik lasay, if it works with the mechanics of bitlo v'lo bitlo, meaning the Torah is saying you're not really completely over the lav until you create a scenario where it's impossible to reverse it. So, for instance, you're not going to be over the lav of divorcing your wife until you make a neder that will assur you to ever marry her again. Then you by hand, like you yourself, violated the lav of not being able to divorce her because you now created a permanent divorce. But the Gemara said, if you hold of Kaimo v'la Kaimo, meaning as soon as you're over the lav, you're chayiv malchus, and unless you quickly fix it with the assay, Bezdin will give you malchus. If that's your approach, that doesn't fit into how we're structuring oinus. So the Gemara says you're 100% right, but today is our lucky day because we hold where this whole shtickle is only to explain the sheet of Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan is the one who holds that the mechanics of a lav hanidik lasay is with bitloi v'lo bitloi. So then the Gemara discussed this machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Shlakish of bitloi v'lo bitloi or kaim v'lo kaimoi, and the Gemara said it really depends on how they learned pshat in Hasra Sofik, because according to Rabbi Yochanan, technically every time they warn somebody, it's only Hasra Sofik. They're warning this fellow, don't divorce her. It's a Hasra Sofik, because divorcing her alone is not enough. Divorcing her will only be a violation of a lav if then you subsequently prevent yourself from ever marrying her again by making a neder not to marry her again. So therefore, that Hasra by definition is a Hasra Sofik. According to Rabbi Yochanan, it's not an issue because Hasra Sofik, Shema Hasra. But according to Rish Lakish, the Baal Hasra Sofik, Loishma Hasra, he has to structure it that even by a lav hanitik lasay, the lav itself, when you're over it in Gansen, and now you're chayv malchus right now. And if you're going to be mekayim dasay, so then it will part you from the oynish of malchus. But the lav happens right away, and therefore the asra would be a good asra. So that's what the Gemara said. Now the Gemara then wanted to illustrate this machlokes. So the Gemara quoted a different case, and the different case was shvua she'ochel kikir za'ayoyim. So I'm really 3 lines from the bottom on Tesvav Amud Beis. Shvua she'ochel kikir za'ayoyim. Someone made a shvua, I'm going to eat this kikar today. Nobody could warn you during the day, you better eat it, otherwise you're going to get malchus. Because I don't have to eat it right now, I can eat it in 5 minutes. So every Yisrael would be Yisrael Sofik. Yes, there could be a shiloh. What about if you warned him at the last nanosecond of the day that he couldn't push it off? That'll be discussion. But Pashtus, it's always Yisrael Sofik because you can't say if you don't eat it now, you're going to get malchus because you might be able to eat it later. So he didn't eat it. Rabbi Yochanan v'Rish Lakish tamid her value ain't like that. There's not a machlokes of what the halacha is. Everybody holds you don't get malchus. The question is merely why. Rabbi Yochanan ain't like her. You know why? Mishum to have a lav shein b'maisa. Because besides the fact that it's a Asra Sofik, it's also a lav shein b'maisa. Not doing something is not doing a maisa. You don't get malchus for violating an isser without a maisa. Because at no time can you warn him and be sure that if he doesn't heed your warning, he'll get Malchus. They're both arguing in a pshat and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said something, and they had a disagreement in what the meaning of Rabbi Yehuda's halacha was. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda says there's an issue of noiser. Noiser is also lav shem b'maiser. You're not eating the meat on time. But it's also a lav anitek lasei, because right after that it says v'noiser mimenu ad boiker b'eish tiserv. So this is a classical setup of a lav anitek lasei. There's a lav, and then it says that if you left over, you should burn it. The Torah decided to make this into a lav anitek lasei, loimer shein loikan love divrei Rabbi Yehuda, so that you shouldn't get malchus. So they're both medayik, vice techois. If noiser did not have an anitek lasei, if there was no asay afterwards saying v'noiser b'eish tiserv, you would get malchus for it. The problem is noiser has two major problems. Noiser is a lav shein b'maiser, and lav is also asura sofik, right? Eat the noiser now, I can eat it in 5 minutes. I mean, eat the meat now, I can eat it in 5 minutes. Rabbi Yochanan daik hachi. Kaimo the Makos. The only reason why there is no malchus is because it's a lav anitek lasei. Haloi ba'akosov. If it would not be a lav anitek lasei, like you would get malchus for the issue of noiser. Aita surah safek. Alma surah safek shema surah. Rish Lakish daik hachi. Rish Lakish was daik the other way. Kaimo the Makos. The only reason why there's no malchus for noiser is because it's a lav anitek lasei. Haloi ba'akosov loika you'd get malchus. So really, it's both. Really, they should both agree that it's both problems. So they should both agree that Asra Sofik is Shema Asra, and they should both agree that Lav Shem B'Maisa is a Chiv Malchus. So the Gemara is now going to have to explain how each mandama deals with the other issue. Rab Shimon ben Lakish Nami Havadai Asra Sofiku. I mean, how could Rab Shimon ben Lakish deny that this is a Hasra Sofik? It is a Hasra Sofik. So why would you be Mechuyev Malchus for Doisa? Zok Gemara, because Sover law, he idich Tanad Rabbi Yehuda. You know why? Because there's actually a Machloikis in Rabbi Yehuda. Because Rabbi Yehuda says otherwise. The Tanya we learned, we're speaking about two men, and we don't know who is the child of these men. In other words, a woman was married to a man and she got divorced, and right after that she married another man without waiting the 3 months of avchana, and now she has a baby. We don't know is her first husband the father of this baby, or is his second husband the father of this baby. The halach is maka aviv moishumos. So if someone is born from this scenario and he hits either one of these two men, he's not chayiv misa because we don't know if he hit the father. But what if it was hikazeh, the chazav hikazeh? He hit one and we said don't hit him, and he hit him, and then he went to the other one, we said don't hit him, and he hit him, or kila lazeh the chazav kila lazeh, or hika shneim bivas achas, or hika shneim bivas achas, or kila shneim bivas achas. Chayiv, in all these cases, one would be chayiv. But Rabbi Yehuda Omer no, b'vas achas chayiv, but b'zachazeh would be potter. Now, this clearly is a case of asura sofek, right? Because if this child is going over to one of the fathers and hits him, if we warn him, if you hit him, you're going to get misa. That's not necessarily true because we don't even know if this is his real father. And if he does each one at a time, each hasra was a hasra sofek. But if it was b'vasachas, so we're warning him about don't hit these two men, because if you hit these two men simultaneously, you'll be chayiv misa. That is no longer a hasra sofek. So it sounds very clearly from this brisa that Rabbi Yehuda holds hasra sofek is loish masra, because Rabbi Yehuda Omer b'vasachas chayiv b'zachazeh is potter. So the Gemara wanted to know Rish Lakish from the brisa of Noisar. It sounds like Rabbi Yehuda holds that hasra sofek is shema asra. Zok Rish Lakish true, but there's another Rabbi Yehuda who says hasra sofek loish masra. This Rabbi Yehuda, and that's who I will hang my hat upon. Rabbi Yochanan havadei lav she'ein b'maisu. What is Rabbi Yochanan going to do? Because he holds lav she'ein b'maisu like in the love. He holds lav she'ein b'maisu ain't like in the love. as he expressed by the case of the neder that I'll eat by the end of the day. So Rabbi Yochanan said it's a lav shem b'maisa, ain't like in a love. I noisar is a lav shem b'maisa, and clearly Rabbi Yehuda holds like in a love if it wasn't for the fact that it was a lav and class A. So tomorrow Savalaki ha the Amar Rabbi Idi bar Avin, Amar Rabbi Amam, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Mishim Rabbi Yishak Lili, Kol Lai Sasa Shebetayra, Lav Sheyesh b'maisa, like in a love, Lav She'ein b'maisa, ain't like in a love. So there's another Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Yishak Lili who holds that Lav She'ein b'maisa ain't like in a love. Which are the exceptions? Which Lav She'ein b'maisa do you get Makos for? Chutz min nishba, someone who makes a shvua, umeimar, someone who does tmura, v'amekalel es chaverei b'shem, and someone who's makal chaver b'shem. But I'll call upon him. Now we have a bigger problem because we have kasha Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda in one place, in the Bryce of Noiser, he's why is one a lav shem b'maisa? Because it's dibur. So why isn't it? What? So that is considered a lav sheyesh b'maisa, even though you get Makos for it, even though it's a lav she'ein b'maisa, because we learned by Makal it's different. There's this discussion about that as well. So Al Kalpanim, we have over here a steer in Rabbi Yehuda, because Rabbi Yehuda in the Bryce of Noiser says lav she'ein b'maisa like in a love, and Hasra Sovek like in a love. Yet we now have a Bryce that quotes Rabbi Yehuda as saying lav she'ein b'maisa ain't like in a love, and Hasra Sovek loy shemasar. So now we have two steers in Rabbi Yehuda. Kasha Rabbi Yehuda. Zok Gemara, Ilay Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. If you're like Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, which is the what? That Hasra Sovek. That Hasra Sofek is lav shemasra. You'll say trey tanoia, leave it to Rabbi Yehuda. There's a machlokes what Rabbi Yehuda held. The Bryce of Noiser holds in Rabbi Yehuda Hasra Sofek, shemasra. The Bryce of Noiser holds shemasra, no problem. The other Bryce that we quoted from the Nether is going to hold Hasra Sofek. I'm sorry, the Bryce that we just quoted from Makos of it. Will hold Asra Sofik loy shemasra, and it's a machlokes what Rabbi Yehuda held. And the Ilay Rabbi Yochanan loy kasha, we have even a better teretz because hadi de hader abe, the brayta where it quotes Rabbi Yehuda who says that lav she'ein b'maisa ain't like in a love is in the name of Rabbi Yosy Glili. It's clear Rabbi Yehuda Amar b'shem Rabbi Yosy Glili. So Rabbi Yehuda by himself holds lav she'ein b'maisa like in a love, like the brayta of Noiser, but Rabbi Yehuda quotes from Rabbi Yosy Glili that lav she'ein b'maisa ain't like in a love. And the brayta up on top, where someone swore that he's going to eat something by the end of the day, where Rabbi Yochanan said it's because it's a lav she'ein b'maisa, so that will be going according to Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rabbi Yosy Glili. Okay, Gavaldik. So now we have two machlokes. We have the machlokes of Asher Sovik, we have the machlokes of lav she'ein b'maisa, and the question is by Asra Sovik, what does Rabbi Yehuda hold? We have a brayta that says one way, we have a brayta that says the other way. Depending on how you learn, that will influence your decision and how you are going to explain Bitlo v'lo Bitlo. Zok more about you. Tanan Hasam. Hanoitel eim al. We know the halacha is if you find if you find a bird, you're not allowed to just take the children. You have to send away the mother. Shalech the shalach haseim v'sabonim tikach lo. I know the words to this pasuk thanks to Yigal Salak. Right? So Tanan Hasam hanoitel eim al habonim. You were over the iser of loisi kacha eim al habonim. If you don't like it, you get Makos. Remember, there the assay comes first, right? Shaleach, no, it says loisikach ha'im al habanim, shaleach the shalach esaim. So it says shaleach the shalach after it says loisikachem. However, Rabbi Yehuda holds loika ve'enim shaleach. It's not a lavanitik lasei. Why not? Zok Rashi, because Kosover Shalech Mekar Mashma. If you read the pasuk, obviously the Torah is trying to say, don't take the mother, but send the mother away first before taking her. So just the pashtus of understanding the pasuk saying you send away the mother first. Lo sikachem ela shalchena koidem lekicha. V'av v'gav d'chsiv basar lo sikach. Even though in the pasuk the assay is listed after the loisha, but it can't possibly mean that. it must mean that your first action that you're supposed to do is to be mishalayach to mother. So lav lememra dim loksa shalayach, which is a lav v'nitik lasei, v'nav a lav shnitik lasei, ella it's a lav shakad ma'aseyu. This is a lav who chronologically the way you would approach the scenario, the shaluch has to happen first. So therefore, it's not a lav v'nitik lasei. We don't consider it that way. Like a mishalayach. No mishalayach bein a because I consider it a lav v'nitik lasei. As Rashi's Kasavi shaleach achar loisikach mashma. After you violated the Isser of taking Em Alabonim, the Torah says fix it by sending away the mother. Okay, so Zok to Gemara, not only that, as the Brisa says, Elazak Klau, whole mitzvahs loisaseh, sheyesh b'kumaseh, any mitzvahs loisaseh that has an essay which is nitik laseh, ain't chayov in Allah. So Rabbi Yochanan, this great rule that the Chacham said, "Kol mitzvahs loisaseh sheyesh b'kumaseh ain't chayov in Allah." What is it referring to? Ein lanu elazois v'odacheres. Don't think there's a large group of mitzvahs that fit into this zaklau. There's only Shaluch HaKam and one other mystery halacha that has this halacha of alav aditak lasei in loikin alav. Omar Belazar Heicha. What is this v'zois cheres? What is this v'oida cheres that Rabbi Yochanan was referring to? Omar Lei, he told them lechitishkach. When you find it, let's see if you can figure it out. You want to know which other one it is? I'm not going to make it easy for you. Let's see you figure it out on your own. So Nofak, Dog for Ashkach, he went out from the Besmedrash in Yeshiva to the Agudah and he never married there. And after Marav, he took out the Mesivta and the Archball when nobody was looking. The Ashkach, and he found the answer. The Tanya we learned, Oynis Shagirish, an Oynis who was Megarish's wife, meaning he violated the Loisuch HaLashal. Im Yisrael, if he's a Yisrael, Machzer Ve'ein Eloika, there he could be Mekayim Dasei of Loisi Elisha. But if he's a Kohen and he cannot remarry her, Loika Ve'ein Machzer, then he gets mal because he can't take her back. Zok Gemara. Hanicha Leman the Tani Kaimo V'le Kaimo. If you learn Kaimo V'le Kaimo, so then you could say the moment he was over the moment he was Mishalech or the moment he was Megarsher, he was over. Elamanda Tani Bitloi V'le Bitloi, it won't work over here. Bishlom Agabi Shaluch HaKam, you can have a Bitloi. Mishkachasla, you can have a Bitloi if you kill the bird. If you kill the mother, you could not possibly send her away. So it's possible that you would have a lav nitik lasei, that if you were mevatel the asay, you made it impossible to do the asay, you'll get malchus, and if not, no. Ela oynis bitlei v'le bitlei heichi mishkachas. How could you have a case of bitlei v'le bitlei? Now we're already the beneficiaries of the maskana of this Gemara. We know it means he made a nether, but the Gemara now is probing to find that scenario where it will be impossible to remarry this woman. Either katla, if he killed this woman, and that's why he can't remarry her, will come lebederabamine. He won't get malchus for divorcing her because when he was mevatel the Isser, he killed her, so he's kind of misa. So of course he doesn't get malchus. I'm sorry, but you still take on lebederabamine because chayv misha shogin. If you do something that creates a chayv misa, that you don't get malchus for it anymore, even though they were noidim. Even if he did it for shogin. You know what he did? On her behalf, he was makabel kedushin from a different man. So now he can't marry her because she's married to another man. Rabbi, that doesn't make any. Rabbi, that makes no sense. Isha visa shliach. He can't just be makabel kedushin for her. If she made him into a shliach to be makabel kedushin for her, then he come avatale. He's not going to marry if she doesn't want to marry him. So she made the decision not to marry him. So he doesn't get malchus for that. And he loishavish a shliach. And if she didn't make him into a shliach to be mekabel kedushin on her behalf, kol kaminei, he can't just do that. V'loy klomi, it's nothing at all. So where is there a case of bitloi in the case of someone who divorced a woman who he married after he was ma'anis? Ela omer Rav Shimi minado kagoyin she'adira barabim. He made a neder barabim that he's not going to have a nofim. That would be very good if you hold ein lo yafara. Even though he made another barabim, Michael and Maimer, how do you have a bitlo? So Gemara de Madirla al das rabbin. He's matir her al das rabbin, which means he needs everybody to agree to be matir her, and that's impossible to acquire such a universal acceptance by everybody. The Amar Mar Hilchos of Allah is neder shahuda barabim yesh le'afara, but al das rabbin ein le'afara. Now there's a little bit of a discussion of what exactly was this neder. Is he answering himself to have enough from her? Is he answering her to have enough from him? There's a discussion about it. Because the question is, he can't make a nether to answer her from having enough from him because they're not his rights, right? The rights that he has to give her, Sher Ksus V'Aina, he can't answer her from having enough from him because he's mishubed to give those to her. So therefore, there are those who learn that the nether he made was he's not allowed to have a noah from her. So Rashi says, no, but Rashi says differently. Rashi says, how was he able to answer her from having a noah from him? So we Toysus quotes Rashi, he found that she did up an avla that answered her to him. So now we can answer her from having a noah from him, because she already caused it, she broke that shibut. But the problem is, I don't like Vlanira. If she did an Aveira, and because of that, it's also for him to live with her, once again, that's not his Aveira. So therefore, he should get Makos for it. If he answers himself to have enough from her, that there's no shibud over there. So therefore, that nether would be chal. Okay. Zogt Gemara weiter. So you're telling me the only two examples of a lavaditik lasei is shiluch kain and oinus? There's many more cases. V'ya'ika simin gezel mashkinu peya gezel v'rachman normally sigzel, and then it says ve'eshiv ve'segzela. Or there's mashkin where the Torah says v'rachman normally shavel al beisai lavoita voitoi, and then it says hashav tashav l'kavay hashemesh hashav tashav l'kavay hashemesh. And in both these cases, you have a case of lavanitik lasei. If you didn't give it back right away, or bitlo if you destroyed it, so you can't give it back anymore. Zakamara, no, you can't do bitlo. You know why? Because hasam, even if you destroyed it, right? You stole something and you destroyed it, so now you can't be mekayim v'heshiv. You could still be mekayim. Even the chayv b'tashlumin ain't like a mashallah. Since you're chayv b'tashlumin, the moment you break this item, you're chayv in payment. So there's actually a shaila if you're goyers, the words ain't like a mashallah. Tosfos is not goyers these words of ain't like a mashallah. So Tosfos says, even the chayv b'tashlumin, you weren't mevatl yet because you're still from that original geneva. You're still chayv to pay. The Ein Loikem Mishalom is mashma. It's working with Ein Loikem Mishalom, and Tosfos struggles to explain that. So Tosfos takes that out of the Gersa. Maskav lo Reb Zeira, but ha'ika mashkonei shel ger umeisa ger. What about that case? If it's a mashkon of a ger, and the ger dies, so you don't pay anybody back because there's no one to pay back. So oy bezoi, that's the case of Bitlo. You can't be mekayim v'heshiv, and there's no chiyuv tashlumin. Zot Gemara hasam. Gavra bar tashlumin. Be'etzem, when I burnt this gneva or this mashkin that I had improperly, there's a chiv on me, as Rashi says, k'shesarfai, v'lo nischayv malchus b'vitl. He wouldn't be mechuyev malchus because there was tashlumin at the time. I l'mais is not paying back. So Rashi v'ayid lo mishalim mishum the shibudu the ger kapaka lachazman. I'm not paying back because the shibud of the ger went off. But l'maisa, for my part, when I burnt it, there would have been an ischayvis of money to pay, and therefore there's no malchus. Right, Gemara by ikapeya. We're looking for examples of things where you can have bitloi v'loi bitloi, and therefore you can be mechayiv some malchus as a lavanitik lasei that he was mevatel liasei. So gzela doesn't work because it always reincarnates itself as a chiv tashlumin. So what about peya? You're not allowed to cut the edge of the field. You have to leave it over for the ani. And then there's the asay la'ani v'lager tazoy v'isam. Umishkachas law. There you could also have a kaimo v'lay kaimo, meaning you cut it down and then you didn't leave it for the ger, or bitlo v'lay bitlo, or if you destroy the scenario where you can no longer give payah. Where is there ever a scenario that you can no longer give payah? The Tanan mitzvahs payah la'afresh min hakama. Me'ikar adin, the way payah is supposed to be done is don't cut the edge of the field, leave that uncut, let the niyim come and cut that for themselves. But that doesn't mean after that point you can't give payah anymore. You were not yet mevatel the mitzvah of payah, because la'hifresh min hakama, if you cut it, still not too late. Ma'afresh min ha'omen, you could still leave the payah from the stalks that are cut down. If you took that in, you could even still give payah from the kernels in the kri, even after you winnowed and threshed. You could still give payah from those grains. But until you put it into a pile, because once you put it into a pile, now there's a chiv meiser. So up until this point, had you given it to the ani would have had it tax-free. Now if you give it to the ani is going to have to pay 10% tax on it. So therefore, you were mafsid ani 10% by bringing it to this point. So therefore, it's still not too late to give payah. Mirchay ma'aser v'noisimah. You have to pay that 10% premium. You have to give him the extra to cover for the fact that now he's going to have to give 10% away. Could you Rabbi Shmuel, the Rabbi Shmuel? So the question here is, but after this point, if you already baked it into a bread, if you already made it into a dough, then it's too late to give payah. So here you have a case of bitlo. If you already ground it, made it into flour, and made it into dough, there you couldn't do payah anymore. That's a bitlo. So you see, you have a case of bitlo, even in the case of payah. So tomorrow we all like Rabbi Shmuel. Could Rabbi Shmuel the Amar af mafresh mina isa? You can even still be mafresh payah if you already made these grains into dough. So that doesn't help, because will be small nami mishkachas law the achal. So what if you ate the isa? So now there is nothing left. Over there you have your bitloi. Ella, you know what we're going to have to say? Ella zois void acheres aha. It's referring to payah. Zois shuluch hakam is a lavanitik lasei, and payah is a lavanitik lasei, because you could do a bitloi if you destroy the dough. You don't have to pay back the ani, and you were mevatel the mitzvah of payah. So Zok Gemara, but it was only Zois Void Acheres. One more. What about Oinus? Avol Oinus loy. Oinus is not a good example of bitloy v'lebitloy. Why? The Heich Amrinon Al Das Rabbim Ein Loy Afar L'Dover Rishos. When do we say that if someone makes a neder Al Das Rabbim, you could never be made for that neder, and therefore he was mevatel his option to be able to remarry her? That's only if it's a Dover HaRishos. But marrying this woman is not a Dover HaRishos. It's a Dover Mitzvah. The Torah is mechayiv him to marry this girl. What is the logic behind it? So Meforshim explained, very simple. Al Das Rabbim, you have to know that every person in the entire world is maskim. How are you going to get that askama? But if it's a Dvar Mitzvah, we know it's a given that everybody would give that askama. So even in Neder Al Das Rabbim, to prevent yourself from doing a Dvar Mitzvah, you could be made for. Why? Because everybody in the world, every Yid in the world, will surely want you to do that mitzvah. And will demonstrate that there's such a case, that even in Neder Al Das Rabbim, you could be made for a Dvar Mitzvah. And this is a fascinating case. Kiha dahu maki dardaki. There was a malamed, to have a pasha b'yanuki. What was his avera? What did he do? What does pasha b'yanuki mean? That in and of itself is a subject of a discussion. Rashi says, pasha b'yanuki means maka oisam yoshim midai. He would hit them too much. So because of that, they couldn't let him be a Rebbe anymore. Adrei Rav Acha, Rav Acha made him make a neder. The shaila is what exactly the neder was, but either he made him make a neder that he will not teach anymore. The Hadrei Ravina, and Ravina was made for the neder and took him back. Why? And that's Al Das Rabbim, because he's making a neder to the public that he's not going to engage in this anymore. Why? He was the best Rebbe. They probably put restrictions on him, but at the end of the day, he taught better than any other Rebbe taught, and therefore we have to be made for the nether, even Al Das Rabbim. Now, I'm sorry? That's right. Now there's another pshat in Davapasha Yunuka means he didn't teach well. He wasn't teaching them thoroughly. They were making mistakes, and that's why they were made to make another. They won't do it again. But the problem is when they tried to replace him, the next guy was even worse. So they said, you know what? We better go back to the original guy. The Eichel Nevelos Utreifos Shkotzim Vermoshim in our Mishnah it says all these people get Malchus. So I'm Rabbi Yehuda. Haiman the Ochel Benisa de Karba. What does a Benisa de Karba mean? It's a worm that you find in cabbage. Rashi teaches it as Toilas Hadimtzos Bekruv Shekarin Tzaila. So it's some type of sheret. The halacha is Malkinin Lake. If you eat that, you get Malchus, Mishum Sheretz HaSheretz ala Oretz. That's called a Sheretz on the Oretz. Zok to Gemara, Hu Ochel Benisa de Karba. And in fact, someone did just that. The Nagde Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda gave him Malchus. Zok to Gemara weiter. Omar Abai, Ochal Putisa. Putisa, Rashi teaches as it's a Sheretz Hamayim. So there's different lavin for eating a sheretz hamayim versus eating a sheretz haaretz. So achal pitiza loike arba. He gets 4 malchios. Rashi says there's 2 lavin that are specific for sheretz hamayim, and then there's 2 general lavin for any type of sheretz. 2 plus 2 is 4. Achal nemola loike chomesh. Why? Because there's the 2 general that we discussed earlier that applies to all types, and then there's 3 specific ones for sheretz ala aretz. So like a chamesh, mishum sheretz hasheretz ala aretz. So there's an extra 3 for sheretz hasheretz ala aretz. So 2 plus 3 is 5. If you added tzira, like a sheish, mishum sheretz oiv, because tzira gets 5 of ala aretz, but since in a stage of its life it also flies, so it also gets the prohibition of sheretz oif, so there's 6 lavin. So this was an important gemara because this was relevant at the beginning of Makos, because we had a discussion of kadei rishasoi mishum risha achas at mechayvoi v'yat mechayvoi mishum shtei rishoyos. But yet the Gemara said that by kasher zomam the Mishnah says you can get malchus sai for the kasher zomam and sai for the loisana, right? We had that as Reb Meir in the Mishnah, and we asked at the time, how is that possible? Why isn't there Kedei Rishasa? The answer is Malchus, the same oynish you can get multiple times for the same action if there's multiple lava that you were over. So here, all you did was eat one thing, yet you're getting 5 or 6 Malchus, right? Why? Because there we don't say Kedei Rishasa to get multiple doses of the same makkah when there's multiple lavin for one maisa, that is not a stira to Kedei Rishos. Amar Abachoy, Hamasha es nekeva. What if someone has to go to the washroom and he holds it in? Over mishum loy tishaksu. He's over a dairaisa of Baal tishaksu, and this means both number 1 and number 2. The Mishnah Berurah speaks out to Ferish. If someone is gazi and he holds that in, that's not a violation of this law. Now, if you remember, we had a discussion at the end of Sanhedrin. I think it was referring to Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah that had to work in the palace of the king, and they were such dedicated servants that they would stand there on duty, even if they had to go to the bathroom, they would hold it in. I don't know if you remember that from the end of Sanhedrin. And we had a question: why isn't there a problem about the shaksu? Well, there's a machlokes we're showing them over here. If this is a deraisa, or if it's only a derabanan, and then that's covered abrius, you could hold in if absolutely necessary. So on the side that it's a derabanan, that Gemara won't be sure. On the side that it's a deraisa, the question will be is how were they able to be over a deraisa because of the Emes Hamelech. So that was the discussion there. Kezok Gemara weiter. Amar Rava bar Afuna. What if you did risek tisha nemalim? You squashed and crushed. I skipped. Amar Abibi bar Bai Haiman the Shasi bekarna de umna. If you drink, in other words, you use as your cup, what do you use? You use a cup that was used by the Makos dam to pull someone's blood out. So basically, you're drinking out of a syringe. It's ekolic. It's someone else's blood was there. So ka'avar mishum loy seshaksu, you over and bal teshaksu. What if you use someone else's cup by a kiddush? Are you ever about the shaksu? I guess not. But it's only if you're drinking out of something that had someone else's blood on it, that's disgusting. Sanitizes it all. Amar Rava bar Avuna. How about Risei Tishan Amolim? You took 9 ants and you crushed them, and now you have ant mush. The heavy echad chai, and together with those 9 crushed ants, you ate one complete ant. The shliban the kazayis, and that ant, the 9 squished ants was not quite a kazayis, but with the live ant, it was a kazayis. It's a question of it was live or was complete. Like a vov, he gets 6 malkis. Hey, mishum beria, you get 5 malkis for eating the ant, which is a sheretz al orange. The echad mishum kazayis nevela, and in addition to that, the crushed ant is no longer the sheretz; it's a kazayis nevela. So therefore, there's an extra malkis for the kazayis nevela. Rav Amar Rabbi Yochanan, he said afilu shnayim vu. Doesn't have to be 9 crushed ants, even 2 crushed ants and the 1 live ant that added up to a kazayis would have the same halacha. And Rabbi Yosef Amar afilu echad v'hu. There's not a machlokes. The question is how big of an ant you can find. The typical is that you would need 10 crushed ants to be able to combine to be a kazayis. But if you had some really big fat ants that would add up to a kazayis with less, that would also be considered a kazayis of it. There's actually a whole big shiloh to eat a Tosha talks about. The iser to eat a sheretz, it doesn't say an iser achila. It just says you shouldn't be mishak yourself with a sheretz. So eating a complete sheretz, you're going to be chayiv, even if it's less than the kazayis, because there's no din achila. But the iser nevela, which is what crushed ants would be, because it's not a sheretz anymore once it's crushed, that you would need a kazayis for, because it says like soichal nevela, you only need to eat a kazayis if it's an iser achila. Amarav, ochel tevel shel meiser ani. What happens if you ate tevel of meiser ani? Meaning, you separated meiser. I'm sorry, you separated all the meisers. The only thing you didn't separate is meiser ani. So it was a year where you, instead of giving meiser sheni, you give meiser ani, and you didn't separate meiser ani yet, and you ate the tevel because it wasn't completed. The tikkun wasn't completed yet because you didn't take meiser ani. You get malchus for eating tevel. Kiman ki aitana. This is consistent with the following Tana. The Tanya we learned. Amar Rabbi Yosy. Oh, I didn't read the Dibra Maskal. More. Ochal tevel u'ma'aser rishon. You shalonat l'trumosoi. You get malchus. So what is tevel? Tevel is even tevel if you were malchus everything except for the ma'aser ani. Amar Rabbi Yosy. Yochalo yechayiv. I would have thought you're not chayiv. Ela ala tevel shalehuram mimenu kol iker. Only tevel that you weren't masaking it at all. None of the matanos that you have to separate. Did you separate yet? There you go, malchus. But huram mimenu truma gedola. But what if you already separated truma? Vat huram mimenu ma'aser rishon. Or you separated truma gedola and ma'aser rishon, but v'loy ma'aser sheni. Or vafilu ma'aser ani. Even if you separated truma, ma'aser rishon, ma'aser sheni, but not ma'aser ani, minayin, how do you know that is considered tevel? Well, Talmud Loimer, I really misspoke. When you are mafresh ma'aser ani, that year you're not mafresh ma'aser sheni at all. But how do you know you still get ma'aser? You still get malchus for eating this tevel. Talmud Loimer suchal lechol b'sharecha. You're not allowed to eat the lashon but suchal lechol b'sharecha masar degancha v'siroishcha v'yitzarecha uv'korish b'karcha v'tzaynecha v'chol nederecha asher tidor v'nedvesecha shru m'shadecha. And it also says v'achlu b'sharecha v'tzaveyu. The passage says kisachala lazeres kol maser tvuoscha v'shona shalishis shna shamaiser v'nesata lalevi lager leyotzav v'lamona v'achlu b'sharecha v'tzaveyu. So we make a hekesh or really a hekesh. Mal lahalon meiser ani. Just like when it says v'achlu b'sharecha v'tzaveyu, it's referring to meiser ani because who are we talking about that's eating it? Ger Yosaman Almana. Who are those? Those are Aniyim. So just like that pasuk is referring the Va'achlu b'sharecha of that pasuk is speaking to Meiser Ani. Afkan Meiser Ani loisucha lechol b'sharecha. You're not allowed to eat something if you have not yet separated the Meiser Oni from. You should know this is actually a machlokas tonight. It's not unanimous that you get malchus for eating tevel if you just omitted separating the Meiser Oni, but you separated everything else. How do I know it's a machlokas tonight? Because it says Rabbi Elazar says, "Ein tzarich likros es Hashem al Meiser Oni shel demai." Demai is produce that we don't know if someone was mafresh trumas and meiser yet because it was purchased from an amaretz. So Rabbi Elazar says if you had such produce, you would not have to separate meiser oni from that. So let's have a quick look at Rashi. Ein tzarich likros es Hashem. Damrinan the Yochanan Kohen Gadol shalach b'chol gvul Yisrael. He wanted to do a survey to see are people being mafresh trumas and meisers. Veran, this is what he discovered. Is Amaya Aretz Chashudin ala Meisers Chutz mi Truma Gedoyla. They were mafresh Truma Gedoyla because they thought there's a Misa B'nei Shemaim if you're not mafresh it, but they were not mafresh Meisers. Amalan Yisrael. So he told Klal Yisrael, "Bana, my dear children, Kishem Shat Truma B'Misa. Just like if you eat Truma, you're Chayv Misa B'nei Shemaim. Kacha Tevel B'Misa. Meaning if you weren't mafresh Meiser, which means your produce is still Tevel, you're also Chayv Misa. So Amad V'Tikan, so therefore we made the following takana. Halakeich me'ama oretz. If you buy produce from an amaretz and you don't know if he was mafresh properly, yafresh kol ha'meisers u'ma'akvan latzmei. Truma, you don't have to be mafresh because we know they're mafresh them. Meisers, they're not mafresh, so you have to be mafresh them. They're chulin. So once you mafresh them, your produce is no longer tevel. You don't have to give it to the Levi. Mehechatesi, it's his, right? But you have to be mafresh. So Adam you can keep that. But and you're allowed to eat the Meiser Rishon. Sherei mutal azar. A Yisrael is allowed to eat Meiser Rishon. U'Meiser Sheni oichel Yerushalayim. And what you separated from Meiser Sheni, you will have to take to Yerushalayim. V'mishnas Meiser Ani, and if it's a year of Meiser Ani, there it's nechleklu Rabbi Eliezer v'chachamim if you have to be mafresh Meiser Ani. The Kamar Rabbi Eliezer, the loy mi boy ifrushim yisofek the loy tzorich. You don't have to be mafresh. You do not have to be mafresh meiser oni. Elafilu likros olovas Hashem. V'loimer meiser oni al krizeh yehibetzvayne bedroimei nami letzar. You don't even have to say, never mind not being mafresh. You don't even have to say one part of this bundle is meiser oni. You could totally ignore the meiser oni on demai. But the chachamim maimrim, the chachamim say no. Kairos Hashem. At least say there's the one area of this kri is meiser oni. So why would they be arguing as to whether or not you have to separate, you have to make Meiser on? The most logical thing they are arguing about is exactly this discussion. The Ma'asavar Vadai Toifloi, one man holds that if you're not Mafresh Meiser Oni, your produce is still Tavel, and therefore the Chacham said Karis Hashem. My supper, but Elazar says, I don't have to be Karis Hashem because even Vada in a Tevel. If you're not Mafresh Meiser Ani, it does not make your produce Tevel. Meiser Ani is not Ma'akif. So maybe that's the Shaila. Amr Le'abai, not necessarily. Because if that was the Machloikis by Vadai, meaning if you're not Mafresh Meiser Ani, when you know for sure you're Mechuyev, if that still makes your produce tevel, if that was a discussion at the Mivli B'Sveikoi, why is Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabban arguing by Demai? Live the Gubavave. Let them have an Machlokes. Is your produce tevel before you mafresh Meiser Ani? Yes or no? But they don't have such a Machlokes. Everybody agrees to our Mishnah that if you have produce and you had not yet been mafresh to Meiser Ani, avad it's tevel, and avad if you eat the remaining tevel, it will be Misa B'nei Shemayim. So what's the question by Demai? One man holds that Amayoretz will assume that they did take off Meiser Ani. Why? Keeping the Mamanahu, since it's not Kodesh, it's only Maman and he can keep it anyway. If Rushi Mafresh, he will be Mafresh it. For abundant Savri, keeping the Trichel Milsa, since it's still a little bit of a pain to be Mafresh it, loy Mafresh. But Kula Mamoida, that if you have Tevel, you have to mafresh Truma, Meiser Rishon, and Meiser Ani, and only then are you allowed to eat the produce. Okay, we'll stop here.